want to thank the organizers of MPAC for bringing not only myself but my entire family down. They were trying very, very hard for a long time to invite me to Houston. And I should explain, when we make Little Mosque on the Prairie, I live in Saskatchewan, which is just about North Dakota, but we shoot it in Toronto. So during the production, I actually have to live away from my family for 5 months, and I commute on weekends. So when we're on off season, I try not to leave my kids, my family, because I'm gone so much. In fact, we start third season on Monday. I fly directly from here to Toronto and start the next 5 months of prep for the third season. So when they asked me, I said, you know, I can't leave my family, and they were actually generous enough to bring my entire family down to Houston, and we've never been before. And it's very exciting because where I live, it's about minus 30 degrees. And my sons, who are like 7 and 9, like in their minds, like, you know, the whole world is winter because this is winter, it's February. So when they, you know, jumped out off the airplane and they walked around outside Houston, and they were like, the grass, it's green here and it's warm. And they're like, we want to live here when we grow up. They were so excited. They didn't understand that, you know, different parts of North America, winter is actually, you know, like summer for us. So everyone kept apologizing for the coolness of the weather, and we're like, no, this is an amazing experience for us being here, and we've been touring Houston for the last 3 days, so it's been fabulous. Thank you so much. I do have things I'd like to say, but what I wanted to do is, how many of you have actually seen an episode of Little Mosque on the Prairie? So you've seen it on YouTube? That's good. I brought one of the final episodes of second season with me. Have you guys heard of JJ? Okay, so everyone keeps asking what's going to happen with Amar and Ryan and what's happening, you know, their relationship. It's sort of the burning question. So we wrote in a romantic rival for Amar named JJ, and this is an episode which I think a lot of young Muslims will relate to. When you are introduced to a potential spouse and you're expected to get to know them for the purposes of marriage, you know, we have the living room courting scene. So when I pitched this to the writers and trying to explain how Muslims get married, they found it utterly fascinating. They said we have to include this, you know, in the arc and show what a typical, well, I wouldn't say typical, I mean, what some people go through. I sort of based this on my experience of, you know, meeting the man who would eventually become my husband, and, you know, sitting with him on that couch and asking those awkward questions about, you know, getting to know one another. And so this is sort of the genesis of where this episode comes from. As well as, have you heard of Samantha Bee on The Daily Show? Have you guys ever heard of that show? She's a guest actress on this episode, so I brought this one to show you. And then I thought after I show this episode, then I can kind of talk about what inspired the series, how it got off the air, how CBC Television decided to make this show, what inspired me, what the process was. And then I'd like to answer your questions about the whole process of becoming a filmmaker in North America. So I just like to start with the first episode.
Her happiness is my happiness.
I don't know what to say.
The proposal.
Muslims get together, what our rituals are like, what our relationships are like, because a lot of non-Muslims, they watch the show to get a slice of life of what Muslims do every day, because it's very strange to them. They only see Muslims on the extreme spectrum on the news as terrorists, as violent people. They never see Muslims as just normal, everyday people going through regular life, being husbands and wives and daughters and sons, the imam in the mosque, and the daily dealings of people, and the emotional relationships between people. And our highest ratings for our shows come from episodes like this, where it's about how Muslims act every day, you know, in normal situations. And I mean, you can see that the costume designers have done an incredible job with Ryan's hijab and her clothes, mashallah. I mean, my Muslim friends tell me that, in fact, you know, she makes us look bad because now she like raised the bar of fashion when it comes to seeing Muslim women dressed like this. Because you always, and it was really important to me when this show was made that Muslims look beautiful on television, because we always, you know, see the extremes of the ugliness. They always make us look so ugly on the news. And I wanted a show where Muslims, you know, look so beautiful, and it's incredible because you know, they joke with the actress that she almost looks better in hijab than she does with, you know, with her hair, because they've done such a wonderful job with her. So this show, you know, alhamdulillah, in Canada, I mean, when I hear the actors talk to people, I mean, they have people on the street who come up to them and thank them for making the show, because non-Muslims have bonded so much with the Muslim community by watching this show. They feel that they understand the community, that they can relate to the community, that they finally, you know, have a show where they can see where Muslims have been humanized and normalized in a way that they've never seen it before on television. So this is, you know, a groundbreaking show, and it's the highest rated sitcom on CBC television. In Canada, we are up against American Idol. That is our competition, and we still maintain our numbers. And to put it in context, in Canada, we don't have a history of sitcoms because it's too difficult to compete against American television shows. Because, you know, the other broadcasters, we only have 3 networks, CTV, Global, and CBC, and CTV and Global are allowed to show American television shows, like, you know, House and Prison Break and Lost, but CBC can only, because it's a government-funded television network, like PBS, can only show Canadian, 100% Canadian content. So that means that it's been almost impossible to get a sitcom on air that will survive in terms of numbers and ratings in order to get another season ordered until this show. This has been the highest rated show they've had in 15 years. It changed the history of the network. Literally, it was the tipping point. I was talking to the president of CBC, and he said this show has been the tipping point for our network because it now has shown Canada that we are a viable network. And then from this show, they have now created another show called Sophie, which is, so Little Mosque is the lead into the next show because we have such high numbers, and they've been able to create 2 more shows as a result of the success of this one. So it has literally changed the future of an entire network. So I mean, that was the big joke in Canada, is that when people said that Muslims are terrorists and they blow up things, Muslims literally saved this network by having this show. And I mean, the fact that non-Muslims are watching it in such huge numbers and such a rating success is an incredible story, because unless you get very high numbers, it's too hard to justify making these shows, because it's almost, I know in American terms it would be considered very small, but in Canada it's almost $1 million an episode. And to be able to pay that much for a show, you have to be able to sell the show to advertisers and be able to generate the funds to keep it going. It's a very, very expensive medium. So I mean, you know, and when I pitched it, I felt that the only network that would have taken a show about Muslims living in the backwater, running in a small town, running a broken down mosque in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly the pitch that would inspire people to think ratings hit right away. But because CBC was a government funded organization, it was their mandate to make sure that regionality and diversity of Canada was represented. So they took the chance on the show, and it paid off for them big time in a way that nobody in the network could have imagined. I mean, people told me when the numbers came in on the first night, there were people cheering at the, in the CBC building, because they couldn't believe what this meant for the future of the corporation. So I mean, it was an amazing thing to have a television show that not only got the numbers and the ratings, but saved a network and was able to prove to Canadians that we have the confidence to make Canadian television in a way that we never had before. So it just, it worked on so many levels for the country. It was unbelievable, and now it's sold to over 80 countries around the world. It's in, actually it's being translated into Hebrew. It's being shown in Israel, it's being shown in Turkey, and it's been shown in Africa and in Europe. And we can't believe the amount of, the number of countries that have asked to have this show translated to be able to see it, because what they're telling us is they've never ever been exposed to a television show where Muslims are just ordinary people living their lives, and this is the first time they've ever seen this. So, I can go on and on and on, but I promised the organizers that I would actually be willing to answer questions from the audience, and that way I can explain more about the show, because I'm sure you have very specific questions. So is there someone here that's going to moderate, or should I just pick? Regina, how do you want it? Okay. So I guess Adina will be my moderator. The DVD for first season only are available, because second season still needs to be mixed and compiled, so you're always a year behind. So first season, which is only 8 episodes, but that was we had a short season, we started in January instead of September. If you go to www.littlemosque.ca, you can order it through the website. And if you give us a couple of months, the last episode of second season will air next Wednesday, or maybe it aired already, I'm not sure because I was here on Wednesday, so I didn't get a chance to see it. Then after a couple of months, once it's all packaged and wrapped up, it'll be available maybe in 6 months from now, inshallah.
Second part, how can we promote it so that it can be televised in the United States?
The thing with the United States is, your American networks, your main networks, they do not broadcast other countries' television shows. They remake shows, right? Like The Office was a British show and they remade it, the American version. So you wouldn't be seeing this show on a major network. What you may see on a major network would be sort of, they're in negotiations right now, and because of the writer's strike, everything got delayed. But they would buy the concept idea and make it the American version, a different writing team, a different actors, a whole different version of it. So that's what they would do, because that's just the way America feels, or the network feels, that Americans wouldn't be able to relate to a show made in another country because there's different nuances of the American Muslim community. So that's why they wouldn't buy this show. So the only way to see it right now is on YouTube or buying the DVDs. And then we'll see what happens with the negotiations.
I was wondering if you're engaging in any viral marketing to basically get it popular amongst, peer-to-peer, word of mouth, and thus build a base that way, which is how The Office got so popular here in the U.S.
Well, in Canada, it's already extremely popular, and because it's selling around the world, we've sort of, it's got a lot of, it has a broad fan base already. And what they do, if you go to littlemosque.ca, they have what they say, the rants by Babar Siddiqui, and he sort of takes one subject like the weather or music, and he'll start to rant on it. So if you go on the website, you'll see little video clips of him ranting, and those are sort of messages that I believe they're also put on YouTube, and they go around. So that's what we've been doing.
The show show depicts Muslims as being pretty westernized. Have you guys got a lot of opposition from the Muslim community as, depicting Muslims as too, Western, or too
liberal?
I guess liberal, right?
It varies according to who you ask. What I find is, and what I always tell non-Muslims, that Muslims are not a monolith, that you won't find one Muslim opinion. Is that it depends on who the Muslim is and what their background is. Like what I generally find is younger Muslims tend to be our main demographic. We're born and raised in North America. They tend to understand the show and relate to it the most. And then like my parents or some of the more conservative immigrant members, either they don't understand the comedy or they think that somehow it's making fun of them, or they're not sure what it is. So I find that the further away you go from someone's cultural background, then the less they're able to relate to the show. And it's interesting to me, like the extreme right wing, like Michael Corrin, they are very upset that this show has become very successful. They're very angry, and they feel that it is wrong to normalize and humanize Muslims because I'm whitewashing Muslims and I'm softening Canadians for the next terrorist attack. And they're very angry. And it's funny, and so they are almost ideologically aligned with the extreme sort of spectrum of the Muslim community, who feel that their version of Islam is the correct version, and that Babar should be the Imam, and that Ammar doesn't have a beard and is too westernized. He shouldn't. And so, weirdly enough, the right-wing non-Muslims and the extreme right-wing Muslims are almost aligned with because they both feel that they have the right to decide what image of Islam and Muslims should be portrayed. And I find it interesting that they ever actually heard each other talking. They would be appalled that they're bedfellows about the same issue, because that's what their complaints are. So the really Orthodox Muslims feel that Ammar should be more he should have a beard, and he should wear a topi, and he should be giving more strict khutbahs, and then Babar should have been the one who should have been the Imam. But they actually have blogs about this, and it's interesting when I read them because there's a certain lack of sophistication in certain parts of the Muslim community when it comes to television shows like this, because the actor who played, we hired the actors on the basis of their acting, right? Not the basis of their background or their religion or their morality, because that's not important. The important thing is that can they act and can they pull together a really well-crafted show? And so there are Muslims who complain that, why aren't all the actors Muslim? They should have gone with the authentic Muslims. The actor who plays Ammar, he's had a wide career, and he's played different characters, and he played a homosexual in one of his other roles. And it's interesting because there's one Muslim who just is so upset, he takes clips of him playing that role, and he takes clips of him playing Imam, he puts them together, and he has like a YouTube thing, he's trying to get Muslims to boycott the show and get them all riled up. And so we see what they're doing, and they're defaming Islam, even though it has nothing to do with the television show. It's completely irrelevant. What his role was in the past didn't, factor into that decision, because he was auditioned and based on his acting ability, we chose him. Because if we had chosen all Muslim actors, none of them could act, the show wouldn't have been successful and it would have died, and it would have been pointless. So I find that there's a certain amount of media literacy that our community is lacking in. We don't understand what it takes to get a show like this on television, and what you have to have excellent writers, even if they're not Muslim, and they're not Muslim, because Muslims don't go into this profession, unfortunately. So we've been trying to get Muslims, hiring them as interns and consultants, but it's very difficult because the majority of our community goes into fields like medicine and engineering and science. And I don't blame them. I mean, those are very secure and well-paying jobs, and it's easy to make good money. But we also need Muslims to start heading into the arts and entertainment and filmmaking and writing, because if we don't start representing our own community from our own perspectives, then we leave that job to other people, and we see already what happens.
Assalamu alaikum. The question I have is, do you believe that the show right now is viewed as an ethnic show? And in that sense, should Muslims continue to build other ethnic shows, or do you see them going to more mainstream shows?
It's interesting. I mean, I find that what non-Muslims are telling me is that it's a very relatable show. That even if you're not Muslim, you watch this show because it's universal. And if you belong to a synagogue, if you belong to a church, if you belong to any house of worship, the issues, of having the very conservative leader who thinks he should have been the leader, the rebellious teenager, the feminist, the Muslim, the person who doesn't really practice their faith, just practices it as long as it helps their business. Otherwise, they're sort of shady characters. All these people are archetypes of people that exist in their community. So they feel that they can watch it, learn about Muslims, yet still relate to their own community. And I feel that if the show hadn't been as relatable and as well crafted and well acted as it was, people wouldn't just watch it because it had Muslims in it. People don't watch television because they want to learn something. They watch television because they want to be entertained. And this is a very entertaining show, so it succeeds on both levels. Number one, people turn it on because they say it's very funny and it's entertaining and they like to watch it with their families. And then number two, it just happens to have Muslim characters in it. So I think that you can transcend that sort of ethnic barrier and make a show that someone who didn't want to watch a show about Muslims would watch because it just is a very funny show. And they just happen to have Muslims in it, and they forget that it's about Muslims. So I think we succeeded on both levels, and it's very rare to be able to make a show that educates and also entertains at the same time. You know what? To be honest, I was trying to become a doctor. I shouldn't like. I shouldn't wrap people's hands for not we were going into medicine, because I was trying, and to be fair to me, I was brainwashed by my parents because they really wanted, their children to become doctors. And so I actually was in a science program at the University of Toronto, trying very hard to get into medical school. And, at the time, of course, I didn't realize it, but my skills didn't lie in science and math and physics and chemistry. And so my marks, although I could get them really high in high school by repeating all my subjects in summer school, which is the trick I was using to get a really high average. Once you get to university, they don't let you do that anymore. You have to actually get the marks where you get them. You're not allowed to repeat the whole year again. And so that's where I sort of hit the wall in terms of my abilities as a science person. And so I was really flabbergasted when I got my rejection letter, because I did not have a plan B at all. I was like, oh no, what am I going to do with my life? And my parents did have a plan B, which was marriage. So suddenly all these, men from the United States, for some reason there's a lot of Muslims from Pakistan who are studying at the universities here who just need that one little thing to get the green card. So they started showing up in my parents' house, with like that living room scene. So I realized very quickly that if I didn't have a plan B, it was already going to be set for me, because my mother was like so thrilled that I didn't get to medical school because she believed, in marriage for girls at a young age. And my father always thought that marriage was what women who failed in their careers did. And so they always had this thing. So while they were fighting it out, I quickly applied to different schools as fast as I could. And a friend of mine, my best friend, had always talked about journalism and filmmaking. And I know nothing about these careers, but their deadlines hadn't passed, so I submitted my CV, and I got an interview with a journalism school in Toronto. And luckily for me, I had a science degree, and they didn't have enough students. All their students that they had accepted had BAs, and I convinced them that they needed someone with a science background to write for the newspapers, because people had to understand science in order to write it. I just failed to mention that I didn't understand science myself, right? But it was enough for him to be really impressed with me, and he accepted my application, and suddenly I was in journalism school with never having written a stitch of, writing for a media event. But it became very clear to me that I had sort of this creative drive inside of me, because suddenly I started excelling at writing and being really creative, and I started winning awards for my work in journalism school. And once I got out of journalism school, the Gulf War had broken out and they were looking for Muslims to work in the newsroom. So I started working my way up at the CBC, ironically enough, as a journalist. When I started to feel that it was a fun career, but it wasn't creative enough for me, and I wondered how one breaks into filmmaking, because there's no one, there's only sort of one way to become a doctor, which is you go to medical school, you become a doctor, but in filmmaking and television, there's sort of no one route. And you don't even have to go to filmmaking school, and I'd never been to filmmaking school. So I took a summer workshop at the Ontario College of Art, and they had a 5-minute filmmaking course. So I took the 5-minute filmmaking course, and I made a film called Barbecue Muslims, and it was based on the Oklahoma bombings. Do you remember that, 1995, was it? So, a year after I got married, Mesa was 1 year old. This is my daughter Mesa and I, by the way. Wave. She was only one, and I thought, and by then I was sort of protected from my mother, because I had been married, and my husband was very supportive of my career, because my mother was hoping that I would get married, and my husband would banish all these crazy notions and just make me a housewife finally and settle down and stop wandering the earth. But he was quite supportive, and he said, no, I think you should try to make this film. So I made the 5-minute film, and it was a comedy of these two Muslim brothers who were sleeping one night, and the barbecue blows up in their backyard, and they're immediately accused of being Middle Eastern terrorists. This was in 1995, and it turned out that it was a barbecue-resistant front, this terrorist group who was blowing up barbecues because of pollution, and they accidentally blew up a Muslim barbecue. And unfortunately for them, no one was paying attention to their cause anymore. They were more concerned with the Muslim terrorists and jailing them, and they're like picketing in front of the jail going, no, it's us, pay attention to us. So I thought it would be funny to do a comedy about, the whole take on Muslims as terrorists. And so I made it in my parents' house, and I used the neighbors and my brother and his friend. It was very amateurish and wasn't really technically sound, but I submitted it to the Toronto International Film Festival, which is a very prestigious film festival in Toronto. And the jury watched this, and they told me this later, they just watched it in awe, and they said, there's going to be a lot of filmmakers who will be upset with us, but we're going to accept this film, because even though there are so many technically superior films out there that are flawless, and this one is certainly inspired from that, she's saying something about a community that's never been said before in a comedic way, and we've never seen this before. And so suddenly, and to tell you how flaky and scattered I am, I didn't even put my address on the application form. So when they accepted the film, they couldn't get a hold of me. They didn't know where I lived because I had left it blank. And so they had to, luckily for me, my brother, because I had moved to Saskatchewan, my brother lived in Ontario. They looked up Nawaz and the last name, and they found him and said, where does your sister live? And he contacted me. And so the film actually premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I watched the audience. I didn't even know I was a comedy writer at that point. I just had made this film at the spur of the moment. And people were laughing. And I thought, my God, I think I can do this. And so what I did, I started cobbling together funding from the Canadian system, put together like a much bigger budget, and made a film called Death Threat. And that was when, when Taslima Nasreen and Salman Rushdie, and it was all about the fatwas of death and writers. So I made a comedy film about a Muslim woman who has written a really terrible novel and can't get the book published. So she decides to go to the local mosque and upset the imam and upset the Muslim community to such a degree that they'll sentence her to death on purpose. She wants the fatwa, right? And then she does all this to exploit her community, and they're just trying to pacify her and make her happy and do whatever she wants because they don't understand. So it's a comedy about her exploiting her community to get ahead with her book. And so I made that short, and it also premiered 2 years later at the Toronto International Film Festival. And at that point I knew that I had a skill and I could exploit it. People were responding to my films. And then the National Film Board of Canada approached me to make a documentary. And I decided to sort of, I was making these comedy films. I wanted to change gears a bit because at the time in our mosque, women had prayed behind the men, for years without a physical barrier. And then suddenly we had a very conservative imam come who insisted that women should be behind some sort of barrier. And so suddenly things started changing for us, for the women. And I started, doing research and realized that in fact these physical barriers were not part of the original Sunnah, that they were manufactured from tradition and patriarchy later on as Islam had spread, and that people were confusing tradition with theology. So I went across the country and started talking to young Muslim men and women about how they felt about this encroaching conservatism and patriarchy in mosques. And when I realized that so many women were upset that this was happening in mosques and they were being prevented from being active participants in the community because of these attitudes, I made a documentary called Me in the Mosque. And I thought to myself, what would happen if the imams weren't always imported from very conservative cultures? What would happen if the imams were born and raised in North America and could relate to their community at the same level as their youth? Would it change the dynamic of the community? And from that idea came Little Mosque in the Prairie, where I thought it would be interesting if a Muslim lawyer gave up his career and became an imam and tried to run it, and what would happen. And then, if he was the ally of the women and young people, and the conservative men would find him threatening. And that was sort of the genesis of the idea. So when I pitched it to CBC, they told me that at that time, the head of comedy, he was Anton Leo, he was Italian, and he goes, I'm the son of immigrants. And when you started talking, those stories of immigrants started coming back to me. And right now Islam and Muslims are in the zeitgeist. And to have someone from the community who belongs to the community wanting to make a show that represented the community appealed to him. And so they were willing to take a chance on me, and they developed the project with me. And then, when it launched, our ratings hit, and it was a surprise for everyone. So that was how the project came to be. Okay.